what if the foundational system designed to keep the American government running, the essential checks from air traffic control to food safety, is systematically being weaponized, forcing a pause every year?
It's a scenario we see playing out again and again.
We are diving deep today into the countdown to the September 30th cliff. That's the mandated deadline for funding the new fiscal year, 2026.
Right.
This is the ultimate deep dive on the USA government shutdown risk. We're analyzing the legal trap, the profound human cost, and, well, the lasting economic shockwaves.
We're aiming to give you the blueprint, really, for decoding this high-stakes political drama.
This is more than just another headline. It feels like a systemic failure point.
It absolutely is, and we are going to provide you with the analysis and context that really matters. We want to transform this complex world of appropriations and continuing resolutions into clear, actionable knowledge.
So by the end of this conversation on the KaiZen channel, you won't just know when the deadline is.
No, you'll understand why the system itself is repeatedly triggered. And crucially, what political dynamics to watch for as the brinkmanship escalates.
We know our audience here at KaiZen is incredibly informed. You follow global events, markets.
Definitely.
So here's a quick challenge for you. Knowing what you know about the current political climate, do you believe Congress will pass all 12 necessary appropriations bills on time this year? Avoiding a shutdown entirely.
What do you think?
Just share 0 for no or 1 for yes right now in the comments.
Yeah.
Let us know your gut feeling.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the consensus.
Welcome back to KaiZen. Our mission today is laser focused on unpacking the sources surrounding the Government USA Shutdown 2025 scenario.
Right.
We're zooming in on that deadline.
Right.
Midnight, September 30th, 2025, when funding for fiscal year, or FY 2026, must be approved.
And honestly, for anyone tracking the stability of the world's largest economy, or even just concerned about basic services, this deep dive is pretty essential.
We aren't just summarizing headlines here.
No, not at all. We are digging into the precise legal and mechanical failures that create this scenario. We'll look at the specific, often painful consequences for the American people.
And that's everyone from, uniformed military personnel to maybe small business owners waiting on a loan.
Exactly. And we'll place it all within the broader, recurring economic context. We'll demonstrate why this is really a systemic challenge, rooted deep in law and, frankly, political calculation.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. It's not just a failure of negotiation. Like, two sides can't agree.
Right. It's more fundamental than that.
It's a profound political calculation that actually leverages an obscure 19th century law to force compliance.
That's the core of it.
We are analyzing the mechanics of an event that has been played out, 21 times since 1980. It's kind of shocking when you see the number.
It is. It's become almost routine, which is the problem. Okay, so to truly master the analysis of a potential shutdown, you absolutely must first understand the foundational legal requirement.
It's not like the government can just print money whenever it wants.
Not at all. The federal government cannot simply spend money as it sees fit. It relies heavily on annual appropriations approved by Congress. That's the key phrase, annual appropriations.
And this funding is currently divided up how?
It's split into 12 major appropriations bills. These cover, well, everything. National defense, health research, the general operating expenses for the entire federal bureaucracy.
So 12 bills Congress needs to pass each year.
Correct. And that leads directly to the clock they are racing against. The mandatory start of the federal fiscal year is always October 1st.
Always October 1st. Got it.
So if Congress fails to pass those 12 annual appropriations bills, and importantly, the president has not signed them into law by midnight on September 30th, 2025.
Then what?
Any unfunded agency instantly shuts down, period.
And this isn't just tradition, it's hard law, right? From the Constitution.
Absolutely. The U.S. Constitution provides the foundation. It states clearly, Article 1, Section 9, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law.
No wiggle room there.
Zero wiggle room. That mandate is absolute. But in reality,
Congress rarely hits that deadline for all 12 bills, do they?
very rarely. It's become the exception rather than the rule. So what happens instead, and this is a staggering number, what we've seen used 47 times just between fiscal year 2010 and 2022.
47 times.
Wow. Is the deployment of these stopgap measures. They're called continuing resolutions, or CRs.
CRs. Okay, I've heard that term a lot. They're basically political adrenaline shots. keep things going temporarily.
That's a good way to put it. They allow agencies to continue operating, usually at the prior year spending levels, for a short period. Maybe 6 weeks, maybe 3 months.
Just buying time for Congress to negotiate the final bills.
Exactly, they buy time. But CRs come with a hidden cost, don't they? They're not a perfect solution.
Right. It feels like kicking the can down the road.
It is. They are not really governance. They are fundamentally delay. And because CRs usually maintain prior year spending levels, they can include complex policy riders attached to them.
Ah, so policy fights get bundled in.
They often do. And crucially, CRs typically include prohibitions on new starts.
New starts. What does that mean in practice?
Well, think about an agency like NASA wanting to launch a major new space probe initiative. Or maybe the Department of Energy trying to kick off a big clean energy research project.
Or the EPA starting a complex environmental cleanup?
Precisely. If they are operating under a CR, they generally can't initiate any significant new programs or substantially increase funding for existing ones, even if Congress ultimately intends to fund them.
So they're just stuck.
They are stuck in a holding pattern, sometimes for half the fiscal year or more. This makes effective long-term program management incredibly difficult, almost impossible sometimes.
So vital research, innovation, infrastructure projects, they're just perpetually stalled by this CR cycle.
That's often the practical effect, yes. It creates inefficiency and uncertainty.
Okay, so the system is designed for spending authority to expire annually. The political process frequently fails to renew it on time, leading to CRs. But the real legal muscle that forces the government to actually cease operations, the thing that turns a funding delay into a full-blown shutdown, that's something else, right?
That is the absolute key. That's the simple trick to understanding this whole event. It's the Antideficiency Act.
The Antideficiency Act. Okay, let's dig into that.
This act, which actually originated way back in 1870 and was formalized into its modern enforcement structure in the 1980s, is really the engine of the shutdown.
1870. That's surprising. So it's not a new law causing this?
Not at all. But its interpretation and strict enforcement are more modern, and it is severe. It prohibits any federal official from entering into obligations.
Obligations meaning spending money, making commitments, signing contracts.
Exactly. Any of that.
Yeah.
Without prior specific appropriations from Congress.
But I have to ask this. If the money usually comes through eventually, right, via a CR or a final budget bill, why is the penalty for spending before it arrives so severe?
That's a great question.
Doesn't that force this massive, costly stoppage? Even if a solution might only be hours or days away, why can't they just, float expenses temporarily? Assume the money's coming.
Because the original goal of the Act, back in the 19th century, was precisely to prevent unauthorized overspending by executive agencies. It was about maintaining congressional control over the power of the purse.
Okay, keeping spending in check.
Right. And the key is that the law, as written and interpreted, makes no distinction between a temporary delay in funding and a permanent absence of funds. If the appropriation isn't there at midnight, September 30th, the authority is gone.
Wow. No gray area.
Very little. The Antideficiency Act only provides an extremely narrow legal escape hatch, an exception only for emergencies involving the safety of human life or the protection of property.
That distinction, emergencies involving the safety of human life or the protection of property, that sounds like it covers very little of what the government actually does day to day.
It covers essential functions, but yes, it's incredibly narrow. Think air traffic control, certain law enforcement, maybe critical medical care in federal facilities. But not routine operations, not research, not processing applications.
So this severe legal framing forces the government to cease all these other non-accepted activities immediately.
Immediately. And failure to comply isn't just a slap on the wrist. It can result in administrative discipline, fines, or even potential criminal sanctions for the federal official who authorizes the spending.
Criminal sanctions. Okay, that explains the urgency.
Absolutely. That's why you see agency heads scramble, as they're required to by the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, to prepare these incredibly detailed contingency plans.
The shutdown plans.
Right. Identifying exactly which personnel, job function by job function, qualify under that narrow accepted definition and who must be sent home furloughed.
So it creates a situation where just being prudent and following the law dictates that you must stop everything.
You must stop. You have to follow the Antideficiency Act. Even if you suspect Congress will likely pass a funding bill soon, it is mandatory.
And that legal structure is what elevates a political disagreement over spending levels or policy riders into a full-blown national operational crisis.
That's the mechanism in a nutshell. #tag 3, the politics and the human cost.
Okay, so we have this mandatory legal requirement crashing headlong into the current political climate. And sources suggest that the political division right now makes reaching an agreement look exceptionally bleak heading into the FY 2026 deadline.
That seems to be the consensus, unfortunately. We see the brinkmanship surface almost immediately in these budget cycles.
Like what? What are the recent examples?
Well, in recent budget fights, we've seen, for instance, Republicans push for short-term measures, maybe clean CRs, but then face immediate pushback from Democrats demanding specific policy writers.
Things like
Extending Affordable Care Act tax credits, or maybe reversing specific proposed cuts to Medicaid funding, things that are core priorities for them.
And those policy demands aren't minor details, are they? They represent fundamental ideological conflicts.
Absolutely not minor. Extending the ACA tax credits, for example, involves billions of dollars and is central to the Democratic Party's platform on healthcare access and affordability.
So, for Republicans maybe focused on fiscal restraint or reducing the size of government, those demands get immediately labeled what? Non-starters.
Exactly. That's the term we often hear, as noted in our sources, non-starter, which immediately signals deadlock.
And this kind of high-stakes legislative brinkmanship, it feels like the default setting now for budget negotiations, doesn't it?
It really does. You look back at the longest shutdown in U.S. history, the one from 2018 to 2019.
35 days.
Right around there, yes. And what triggered it? It was triggered entirely by a dispute over funding for the border wall. A single, highly contentious policy issue held up funding for large parts of the government.
And this predictable cyclical impasse, where the budget process itself is used as a weapon, what does that do to public trust?
It leads to a rapid, measurable erosion of public trust in Congress, in political leadership generally. Researchers like Carlin Bowman, writing for Forbes back in 2025, consistently noted this phenomenon.
It just suggests to the public that Congress is incapable of performing its most basic constitutional duty, funding the government.
Precisely. It feeds cynicism and gridlock narratives.
Okay, so when that clock does hit midnight on September 30th and the Antideficiency Act kicks in, the first people who feel the immediate, really devastating consequences are the federal workers and their families.
Absolutely. The human cost is immediate and significant. We are talking about potentially nearly 3% of the entire U.S. labor force being directly affected.
3%, that's huge. How many people is that?
Well, think about past shutdowns like 2013 or 2018-19. You saw roughly 800,000 federal employees furloughed, and potentially impacting up to 4 million federal contractors as well, whose payments stop.
And given the size of the government today, a full shutdown could easily mean what? Maybe 900,000 federal workers furloughed?
Easily. It could approach 1 million households whose financial stability is instantly compromised. They're forced to make incredibly difficult choices about paying rent, buying groceries, childcare.
It's critical we clarify the terminology here because it dictates who stays home and who has to work, but without pay.
Exactly. We have to distinguish between the two main categories of employees during a shutdown.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, you have furloughed employees. These are the individuals sent home without pay. Their job duties are not deemed necessary to protect life or property under that very narrow definition in the Antideficiency Act.
Sent home, no pay. Got it. And the second group?
The second group is accepted employees. These employees are required to report for work immediately, but crucially without pay during the shutdown period.
Required to work for free, essentially.
For the duration of the funding lapse, yes. Their duties fall under that narrow life and property exception. Think air traffic controllers, border patrol agents, TSA screeners at airports, federal prison guards.
Critical functions, clearly.
Yes, functions deemed essential to immediate safety and security.
Now, that distinction is vital, but I think the language often used in the media misses the point entirely. That term, non-essential.
Ugh, yes. That term is officially discouraged by the government itself.
It's just wrong and, frankly, demeaning.
It's both. It's a total misnomer. These are dedicated professionals committed to public service. Agencies prefer the term non-accepted because it accurately reflects their legal status under the Antideficiency Act, not their importance to the country or the agency's mission.
But when the headlines scream non-essential workers sent home, what does that do long-term to morale, to recruitment for these vital agencies?
It fundamentally undermines the civil service. It's incredibly damaging. You had that EPA employee during the 2013 shutdown saying, "We love public service, but it's just too unstable."
Right. The perceived main benefit of a government job, The stability, the reliable income just vanishes instantly during these events.
It evaporates, and that stability risk applies equally to the millions of federal contractors trying to staff complex, long-term projects. It creates a massive hurdle for retaining and recruiting the top talent needed for critical national priorities, whether it's infrastructure, scientific research, or cutting-edge defense technologies. Who wants that uncertainty?
And the impact on our active duty military personnel? That seems uniquely painful and maybe even dangerous.
It is. They're legally required to report for duty. Readiness can't stop. But they face the immediate threat of going without pay.
And we're not just talking about missing one paycheck being an inconvenience. For many service members and their families, the financial margin is razor thin, isn't it?
It really is. The statistics are quite sobering. Sources show that back in 2022, over 25% of enlisted active duty military families reported experiencing food insecurity.
1 in 4 families struggling with food while serving the country.
Yes. And for service members of color, the likelihood of reporting that level of financial distress was actually twice as high.
That's shocking.
It is. So pay uncertainty during a shutdown just amplifies this immense pre-existing stress. Imagine being deployed overseas, worrying about whether your family back home can buy groceries because of political gridlock in Washington. It forces families to deplete emergency savings, rely on loans or aid just to keep the lights on.
And there's a crucial detail here, a bureaucratic complexity from the 2018-2019 shutdown that often gets forgotten. The military impact wasn't uniform across all branches, was it?
No, it wasn't, and this highlights the absurdity sometimes. The Coast Guard was the only military branch affected by that specific funding lapse.
Only the Coast Guard. Why? They perform critical national security missions.
It comes down purely to administrative placement within the government structure. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps are funded under the Department of Defense, the DoD.
And Congress usually passes the DoD funding bill separately, and often earlier.
Correct. The Defense Appropriations Bill is often prioritized and passed standalone, shielding most DoD personnel from the shutdown drama affecting other agencies.
But the Coast Guard, they fall under a different department.
Exactly. Administratively, the Coast Guard is housed within the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and DHS funding relies on a general appropriations bill that frequently gets snarled in broader political disputes, like the border wall funding fight back then.
So purely because of which bureaucratic box they sit in, DoD members got paid. But the Coast Guard, doing critical maritime safety, drug interdiction, search and rescue, saw their paychecks delayed.
That's right. The delay hit active duty pay, benefits for civilian Coast Guard workers, and even pay for Coast Guard retirees.
That must have been incredibly stressful. I know organizations like Navy Federal Credit Union step up with specific government shutdown programs offering zero-interest loans, essentially.
They do, and those programs are lifelines. But the very need for these emergency programs illustrates the severity of the immediate financial hit these families take through no fault of their own.
And beyond pay, the stress extends to basic employee rights and scheduling, doesn't it?
It does. A shutdown is legally categorized as an adverse action. This provides certain notice and appeal rights, but it also means disruption. For instance, agencies are generally required by the Antideficiency Act rules to cancel any previously scheduled paid time off, annual leave, sick leave for employees unless that employee is designated as accepted.
So planned vacations get canceled, family trips lost.
Yes. Canceled vacations, lost deposits on flights or hotels, heightened family strain, all triggered by a political failure hundreds or thousands of miles away. It adds another layer of frustration and instability to federal service.
Okay, so amidst the chaos, it's important to clarify which public services do keep running. The key distinction, again, is mandatory versus discretionary spending.
Right. Mandatory spending continues automatically.
Generally, yes. Services funded by mandatory spending continue uninterrupted because their funding doesn't rely on those annual appropriations bills.
And what are the big ones people rely on? The biggest are the major entitlement programs: Social Security payments, Medicare, and Medicaid. If you rely on those checks or services, they will continue to arrive or be available. The funding mechanism is separate.
That's a huge relief for millions. What else keeps going?
Well, we can't forget two major, highly visible operations that continue despite congressional failure to pass appropriations.
Okay.
First, the U.S. Postal Service, USPS. It's fully independent financially.
Funded by stamps and services, not taxes directly.
Exactly. It's funded through the sale of its products and services, not by annual appropriations. So mail delivery continues without disruption, That's crucial.
Definitely. And the second?
Second, the core constitutional checks are maintained. The president and cabinet members continue working. Their salaries are funded differently. And importantly, Article 3 federal judges.
Supreme Court, district courts, circuit courts of appeals.
Right. Those judges keep receiving their salary because the Constitution explicitly forbids reducing their compensation while they are in office. It's a separation of powers safeguard.
Okay, so Social Security, Medicare, mail, the president, top judges, they continue.
Correct. But once we shift to the vast array of services funded by discretionary spending, the things Congress has to approve funding for every single year, that's where the pain points become immediate and highly visible to the average American and even global travelers visiting the U.S.
Okay, let's dive into the specifics of what truly shuts down and the direct impact it has on citizens' lives. First up, a really visible one, national parks and public lands.
Yes, these often become symbols of the shutdown. They face overflowing trash bins because maintenance crews are furloughed, restrooms locked, visitor centers closed, campgrounds shut down.
It basically becomes ghost towns, or worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't we see actual damage during the 2018-19 shutdown?
We did. Irreparable damage in some cases. That specific detail you might remember about protected Joshua trees being cut down illegally in Joshua Tree National Park because there were no rangers on patrol.
That's awful. That's not just inconvenience. That's lasting environmental damage caused directly by political failure.
It absolutely is. And that anecdote is critical because it moves beyond mere financial loss or inconvenience. When these treasured sites are unstaffed, the risk of vandalism, resource damage, and public safety incidents skyrockets.
And there's a financial hit too, right? Lost revenue.
Significant lost revenue. For instance, the National Park Service lost about $7 million in entrance fees and other revenue during the relatively short 2013 shutdown alone. Those are funds desperately needed for park upkeep, trail maintenance, conservation efforts, meaning taxpayers effectively pay twice once operations finally resume, and the backlog of work needs to be addressed.
Okay, next. Public safety. This feels even more serious. What happens with food safety?
This is a major concern. The FDA's food safety inspections, routine inspections of processing plants, imported foods, are largely stopped or drastically reduced.
So they only respond to emergencies.
Pretty much. They become limited only to immediate high-risk emergency situations. Long-term food safety initiatives, the kind of preventative work that stops outbreaks before they happen, including crucial monitoring for foodborne illnesses like E. coli or salmonella, are halted.
That must create widespread consumer anxiety. I remember during the 2018-2019 shutdown, there were real concerns being raised about the safety of imported produce or maybe domestic meat processing plants.
Absolutely, because that routine preventative oversight just vanishes overnight. It starkly illustrates how a budget failure in Washington can translate directly into a potential public health risk on your dinner plate or at the grocery store.
Okay, let's talk money. Taxes. What happens at the IRS?
Prepare for massive delays and service disruptions if a shutdown occurs, especially near tax season. The IRS stops most enforcement activities.
Which, ironically, costs the government money, right?
Yeah.
Because enforcement brings in revenue.
Yeah. Exactly. Enforcement normally collects about $1 billion per week for the Treasury. So halting that actually worsens the deficit temporarily. But for the average person, the impact is felt elsewhere. Tax filing assistance, those taxpayer assistance centers you can walk into, telephone helplines, they are largely halted.
But the big one for most people is tax refunds, isn't it?
That's the critical impact for millions of households and businesses. The processing and issuing of tax refunds can be significantly delayed.
How much are we talking?
Well, back in 2013, roughly $3.7 billion in refunds were held up. And a shutdown can also delay the start of the next tax filing season itself.
Really? Why?
Because the complex computer programming, the updating of forms, the rigorous testing needed to process new tax codes and ensure accuracy, much of that work can't be completed on schedule if the IRS staff are furloughed. This can push the start date back by up to 2 weeks.
Wow. That ripple effect just compounds the financial stress, especially for lower-income families or small businesses counting on that refund money early in the year.
Absolutely. It disrupts household budgets significantly.
Yeah, and speaking of small businesses, they often feel like the forgotten collateral damage in these political fights. What happens to federal loan programs?
They just freeze, instantly halted. Sources show that during the 2013 shutdown, approximately 700 small businesses had applied for about $140 million in federal loans, SBA loans, for instance. None of those could be processed or approved until the government reopened and funding resumed.
So businesses needing capital to expand, hire, or even just make payroll are just left hanging.
Completely left hanging. And if you track venture capital or the innovation economy, the impact on small business investment company or SBIC license approvals is particularly damaging.
It's BICs. Those help fund startups, right?
Yes, they leverage private capital alongside government guarantees to invest in promising startups. For every single SBIC license approval that gets delayed or lost due to a shutdown, the economy potentially loses around $175 million in downstream capital investment leverage.
$175 million per license. That's huge potential lost.
It is. These programs are vital engines for job creation and scaling innovative companies, especially in high-tech fields or the defense industrial base. And the approval process is simply frozen solid by the political impasse in Washington.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to the most vulnerable populations. You mentioned mandatory spending like Social Security continues, but what about programs like SNAP, formerly known as food stamps? The benefits themselves are mandatory, right?
The benefits themselves are mandatory spending, yes, but the administrative mechanisms surrounding the payment, the state agencies that process applications and distribute the funds, the federal oversight that's often funded through discretionary appropriations.
So the plumbing gets clogged even if the water source is okay.
That's a good analogy, because the funding for the administrative staff and the technology needed to process those SNAP benefits relies on those annual discretionary appropriations. A shutdown forces states into emergency maneuvers.
I like what?
They often have to disperse SNAP benefits early, sometimes well before the 20th of the month, using leftover funds or contingency authorities. They do this to try and ensure delivery before their own administrative funding potentially runs out during a prolonged shutdown.
But getting the money early, that sounds good, but does it cause problems?
It does. That altered timing is critical and counterintuitive. Studies based on past shutdowns show that because the money arrives much earlier in the month than usual, this causes predictable, documented shifts in household spending patterns.
How so?
Families may spend more upfront, but then it leads to increased food insecurity later in the month for some low-income families as they struggle to stretch those same funds across a longer period than they're accustomed to.
So even a mandatory program suffers acute negative consequences when the administrative apparatus supporting it fails due to political deadlock.
Precisely. It shows how interconnected everything is. And we also see a dangerous slowdown in other public health functions.
Like what?
Employees responsible for key food safety inspections, as we mentioned, but also product safety checks, workplace safety inspections through OSHA. Many of them are furloughed.
So less oversight on dangerous products or unsafe workplaces.
Correct. Plus, critical background work gets delayed. Preparation for the upcoming flu season, monitoring other emerging public health threats like disease outbreaks, that capacity is diminished, potentially leaving the country more exposed to preventable health risks. #TagV, macroeconomic consequences, and business uncertainty.
Okay, let's zoom out to the bigger economic picture.
Yeah.
The analysis often starts with this somewhat comforting notion that the overall effect of a shutdown on the American economy is usually modest.
You do hear that, yes.
On average, real GDP still grew about 2.2% during past shutdown periods. And the reasoning is usually what?
Yeah.
That they're temporary and federal workers eventually get back pay.
Right. The logic is that shutdowns are typically short. The historical average is just over a week. And since federal workers generally receive retroactive pay, thanks to subsequent legislation, the hit to overall consumer spending is somewhat mitigated. The money eventually flows.
But that perceived modesty, it feels like it masks a very real and sometimes permanent cost, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. That aggregate view hides significant pain and accumulating costs. The 2013 shutdown, which lasted 16 days, was estimated to subtract a very significant $24 billion from the economy.
$24 billion in just over 2 weeks.
Yes, and it trimmed at least 0.6 percentage points from GDP growth in the fourth quarter of 2013. That's not insignificant.
And the longest shutdown, the 2018-2019 one.
That one, according to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, permanently shaved about $3 billion from GDP.
Okay, that figure, $3 billion permanently lost, that's the number that should really grab our audience's attention. Why permanent? If the workers get back pay eventually, where does that permanent subtraction come from? What's lost forever?
Great question. The permanence comes down to lost productivity, canceled or delayed investments, and disrupted economic activity that simply can't be recovered.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about it. When a key regulatory agency halts an environmental review needed for a major private infrastructure project, That project delay costs real money and time. It might even be canceled.
Or those 10,000 stop work orders on federal contracts we talked about.
Exactly. When those contracts are paused, the work isn't just deferred. Sometimes the window of opportunity closes. Maybe a tech company misses a key deadline for a government deliverable, impacting its next funding round. Or a small business relying on that contract has to lay off workers.
So businesses that delay R&D, cancel hiring plans, or miss a key government contract window because of the chaos, they don't just rewind the clock and recapture that economic activity once the government reopens.
No, often they can't. Market conditions change, opportunities vanish, that economic activity shifts elsewhere, or it just dies completely. That's where the permanent loss comes from. Lost output, lost innovation, lost investment.
And beyond the sheer monetary cost, there's another major impact. The shutdown deprives the entire financial world of crucial, non-negotiable economic information.
This is a huge secondary effect. Federal statistical agencies like the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have to delay the release of key economic data points.
We're talking about the really big ones, right? Like the monthly jobs report.
Absolutely. Critical reports like the jobs report, the non-farm payrolls, or NFP, and the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which measures inflation. These are the bedrock data points that global investors, analysts, and policymakers rely on.
So if a shutdown happens on October 1st, we might not get the initial jobless claims data the following Thursday, or the big NFP report the first Friday of the month. It creates a genuine information blackout.
A total blackout. And if you follow the financial markets, you know this lack of visibility is a major issue. Think about this scenario. What if key inflation data, like the CPI report, is scheduled for release right before a crucial Federal Reserve meeting where they're deciding on interest rates?
And that data just doesn't come out. How does the Fed make a decision?
It paralyzes them, or at least makes their job exponentially harder. The Federal Reserve relies on a steady stream of accurate, timely data to build its economic models of inflation, employment, growth. When that data stream suddenly stops because the agencies producing it are shut down,
The predictive models become unreliable.
exactly, it severely complicates their decision-making process for monetary policy. Do they raise rates, lower them, hold steady? They're flying partially blind. This uncertainty is a major driver of market volatility, which global markets inherently dislike.
Right, global markets, stock exchanges, currency markets,
Yeah,
they're incredibly sensitive to U.S. political stability, or lack thereof.
extremely sensitive. And the primary risk for investors isn't usually that a shutdown itself will cause a recession. Historically, they haven't directly done that.
So what is the big fear for markets?
The big fear, the nightmare scenario, is the potential for a catastrophic credit downgrade to the U.S.'s sovereign credit rating, that AAA status.
Especially if a shutdown were to overlap with a fight over the debt ceiling, right? That seems like the real danger zone.
That scenario becomes exponentially more dangerous, yes. If political dysfunction not only stops appropriations, but also threatens the government's ability to pay its existing debts, that's when rating agencies get really nervous. Fitch Ratings warned explicitly about this combined risk during the 2018-2019 shutdown event.
And the consequence of a credit downgrade, like the one Standard & Poor's did back in 2011 after a debt ceiling fight, it's immediate and severe for basically everyone listening, isn't it?
It is. The U.S. credit rating is the bedrock, the benchmark for global finance. A downgrade makes borrowing instantly more expensive for the U.S. government itself.
Which means higher interest costs for taxpayers down the line.
Correct. But it also pushes up borrowing costs for major corporations and, critically, for American households through higher interest rates on mortgages, car loans, credit cards, everything.
So it's the volatility, the uncertainty, and the potential for that downgrade, not just the temporary closure itself, that are the primary long-term market impacts.
That's a very good summary of the market perspective, yes.
Now, let's bring it back to the ground level. The ripple effect hits the federal contractor community, you mentioned maybe 4 million workers, with devastating force.
It's a huge hit. Federal contractors, especially the smaller businesses that might rely solely or heavily on government work, face massive immediate uncertainty.
Because a shutdown means three things hit them all at once, right?
Right. First, halted funding and severely delayed payments for work already performed. Second, no new contracts can be signed or awarded. And third, perhaps most dramatically, they can receive stop work orders.
And we heard that number before the 2013 shutdown resulted in over 10,000 stop work orders issued across the contracting community. That's an enormous amount of disruption.
It's massive. Imagine getting that notice. Cease all work immediately, uncertain when you can restart or when you'll get paid next.
But the financial pain doesn't even stop there for contractors, does it? Because they can request compensation for the costs they incur due to these federally mandated stops.
Exactly. Under federal contracting regulations, contractors can often request what are called equitable adjustments to their contracts to cover the costs incurred specifically because of the government-caused shutdown or stop work order.
What kind of costs are we talking about?
Things like the cost of maintaining idle facilities, unabsorbed overhead costs during the pause, or the costs of retaining essential personnel on payroll even when there's no work for them to do, just to ensure they're available when work resumes.
And processing thousands of these equitable adjustment requests after a shutdown, that must be complex and add even more cost later.
Extremely complex and time-consuming for both the contractor and the government contracting officers. And ultimately, the final bill for all these adjustments just adds to the overall taxpayer burden once operations resume. It means the political delay ends up costing us far more in the long run than any temporary savings realized during the funding lapse itself.
It's like paying interest on dysfunction.
That's not a bad way to think about it.
And this risk is so real, so predictable now, that we're actually seeing advisory groups and consulting firms issuing detailed guides right now. I saw one from APRIO, dated September 26, 2025, specifically telling businesses how to prepare for the 2025 shutdown.
That tells you everything, doesn't it? This isn't theoretical contingency planning anymore. It's active risk management. Business leaders are executing strategies right now.
What are they advising?
Things like proactive planning, securing lines of credit maybe, emphasizing open communication with their government contracting officers to understand potential impacts, and meticulous documentation of all costs incurred during the disruption to support those equitable adjustment claims later. It's about minimizing the financial strain and ensuring they can hit the ground running once operations resume. #tag stags finals. Reopening and long-term lessons.
Okay, so eventually, maybe after days, maybe weeks, Congress finally passes a continuing resolution, or maybe even a full omnibus spending bill. Funding is restored. But how does the government, this massive administrative behemoth, actually resume operations? It can't be as simple as just flipping a switch back on, can it?
No, it's definitely not that simple. It requires a coordinated effort, and this is actually mandated by the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB.
OMB requires agencies to plan for reopening, too.
Yes. Agency shutdown contingency plans must include detailed procedures for resuming operations efficiently once funding is enacted.
What do those plans involve?
They have to outline the specific method for notifying all the furloughed employees who might be scattered all over the country, maybe even overseas, that the furlough has officially ended and that they are expected to return to work on a specific day and time.
Communication must be key.
Absolutely. Getting the word out quickly and clearly is paramount. The plans also often include providing some flexibility for supervisors, maybe allowing employees to use accrued leave to deal with any return-to-work issues, childcare adjustments, things like that.
And what about the pay situation? We know furloughed workers generally get back pay thanks to laws Congress usually passes after the fact.
That's generally true, yes. The Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019 now mandates retroactive pay for furloughed employees as soon as practicable after the lapse ends.
But what about those accepted employees, the ones who were required to work throughout the shutdown without getting paid?
That's a crucial detail for their financial recovery. Those accepted employees who worked without pay during the funding lapse are entitled not just to their base back pay, but also to any overtime pay, night pay differentials, holiday pay, and other allowances they would have earned as if the work had been performed and paid on time.
So they're made whole, at least financially.
The intent is to make them financially whole, yes. It's a small but critical acknowledgement, given they bore the biggest burden during the lapse by performing those essential functions essentially for free under significant stress.
Yeah, without that guarantee of eventually getting paid, including overtime and allowances, recruiting anyone for those critical accepted roles would probably be impossible.
It would be incredibly difficult, yes.
Now, when we look back at this whole phenomenon, it's striking that government shutdowns, in this form, are a uniquely American problem and relatively modern, aren't they?
They really are. We've had, as we mentioned, 21 significant funding gaps causing shutdowns since 1980. Before that, funding gaps happened, but agencies generally continued operating under the assumption funding would come through.
So what changed around 1980?
The modern framework was essentially established by two key opinions from Attorney General Benjamin Civletti under President Carter in 1980 and early 1981.
Civletti, okay. What did his opinion say?
They essentially mandated a much stricter interpretation and enforcement of the Antideficiency Act. They concluded that, barring those narrow life and property exceptions, agencies absolutely must cease operations in the absence of appropriations. No more assuming the money would come later.
So that legal interpretation fundamentally altered the landscape from keep working, the money will show up, to a mandatory stop work order the moment funding laxes.
Exactly. That shift is what institutionalized the modern government shutdown as we know it.
Now, when we analyze this whole messy process, some experts, like those cited from Harvard Law, note that this tension, this push and pull between Congress wielding the power of the purse and the executive branch managing the actual government operations, it's kind of fundamental to our system of checks and balances, isn't it?
It is. The appropriations process, however flawed it often seems in practice, remains one of Congress's most potent tools to exert policy leverage and conduct oversight over the sprawling executive branch and its agencies.
So, while everyone hates the drama and the disruption of shutdowns, completely moving away from time-limited annual appropriations, that could have downsides too.
It could. Imagine, for example, if Congress just passed perpetual multi-year CRs or massive omnibus bills covering years at a time just to avoid the annual fight.
What would be the risk there? Less accountability.
Precisely. If Congress loses that regular annual lever of controlling the purse strings, agency accountability could diminish. Congressional oversight might weaken.
And there's another practical problem with constantly delaying budgets too, right? Even if they avoid a full shutdown.
Yes. When final budgets are only approved late in the fiscal year, maybe 6 months in after multiple CRs, agencies then have less than half the year to actually execute an entire year's worth of funding and programs.
Which leads to...
It often leads to compressed, lower quality budget execution, maybe wasteful spending rushes at the very end of the fiscal year just to get the money out the door. It's inefficient. So there's this necessary tension inherent in the system, even if the way it's currently playing out through shutdowns is terribly flawed and costly.
Well, we have certainly taken a deep dive today into the mechanics and consequences of the 2025 shutdown risk. We've analyzed everything from the impact on military families' paychecks and the freezing of vital federal loan programs,
to the staggering economic disruption caused by delayed data releases and those permanent losses to GDP we discussed.
You, our listeners, have successfully completed your knowledge upgrade on the KaiZen channel. Hopefully, you are now better equipped than almost anyone to understand the precise legal triggers, the human costs, and the economic fill-out of this highly complex and unfortunately cyclical event.
And if we try to connect all these threads back to the bigger picture, it seems the root problem really lies in how that Antideficiency Act is currently interpreted and applied.
The law mandating a complete stoppage of non-accepted functions the moment funds lapse.
Right. A law originally intended, perhaps, for genuine fiscal emergencies, but which is now routinely triggered by, frankly, ordinary political disagreements over spending priorities.
Which raises a really important, maybe provocative question for you, the informed listener, to think about after this. Should the foundational law governing our nation's fiscal responsibility, the Antideficiency Act, be so easily weaponized in routine political disputes, forcing these immense human and economic costs?
Or does the mandatory nature of the shutdown, however painful, still serve a necessary, if blunt, role in ultimately maintaining congressional accountability and control over spending? It's a tough balance.
That's definitely something to chew on. We really want to hear your perspective on the more immediate impacts, too. Thinking about all the disruptions we discussed, national park closures, a lapse in food safety oversight, delays in getting your tax refund. What single-service disruption would affect you or your community the most?
Yeah, what hits closest to home for you?
Pause right now and just share a simple word or phrase in the comments, maybe just parks or food safety or tax delay, to let us know your thoughts. It helps us understand what resonates.
Please do.
And if you found this detailed breakdown helpful, if you feel more informed now, please take just a second right now to like this deep dive.
It really helps the channel.
And subscribe to KaiZen if you haven't already so you don't miss our future analyses. And please, share this with anyone you know, friends, family, colleagues, who needs to understand the true, often hidden, costs of a political budget standoff.
Spread the knowledge.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and stay informed.
Welcome to The Critique. Today, we're looking at a listener's analysis of U.S. government shutdowns, the impacts, the finances, the human side. It's quite detailed.
It really is. Lots of good material in there.
So let's jump right into our feedback.
Okay. So the first thing that struck me is while the material lays out all these specific consequences, across different sectors.
Yeah, it's very thorough on the what happens.
Right. But it feels like it needs to better synthesize why those things actually force a political resolution. It kind of documents the pain points.
As unfortunate facts, maybe, rather than like the levers that actually move things in D.C.
Exactly that. The weakness is not really weaponizing those excellent data points about hardship to explain, what finally breaks the gridlock.
Okay, so the suggestion here is to reframe those real-world costs more explicitly as immediate political leverage.
Precisely. Sharpen that crisis element by showing where the system really cracks under pressure.
Makes sense. What are some concrete examples of how to do that?
Well, take the military families point. The analysis notes the Coast Guard issue in 2018-19. They didn't get paid because they were under DHS, not DOD.
Right, that's a really stark contrast. And the piece mentions, I think, that over a quarter of enlisted families faced food insecurity in 2022, that specific vulnerability.
Yes, that's the kind of targeted human cost that becomes politically difficult to ignore, much more than just a general statement about hardship. Contrast it directly with the DOD funding status.
Got it. Human cost is leverage point one. What else?
Then there's the localized economic pain, instead of just the big, multi-billion GDP hit.
Which can feel a bit abstract sometimes.
Exactly. Focus it. Use that data point about personal consumption expenditures near government and military sites dropping $102.8 million in 2018-19.
And that meant a 2 percentage point hit specifically in D.C.'s economy.
Right there. That's tangible. It shows immediate damage in a very specific politically sensitive area. That's leverage point 2.
Okay, so human cost, localized economics, is that enough to force Congress's hand?
Maybe not always on its own. That's where the third point comes in. Systemic anxiety. We need to bring in the financial markets more forcefully.
Uh-huh.
Don't just mention the $3 billion permanent GDP loss, which is, backward-looking. Talk about the immediate market reaction.
Like the S&P 500 dropping?
Yeah, it corrected by, 13% right before that 2018-19 shutdown really bit.
Okay.
Showing that kind of visible aversion from the broader financial system adds another layer of pressure. It says the uncertainty itself is damaging, systemically.
So human cost, local economic pain, and then broad financial market fear. That combination creates a much stronger narrative for why a resolution happens.
Exactly. It moves beyond just documenting impacts to explaining the actual mechanism of crisis resolution. That's the goal.
Okay, let's shift gears. The second area is agency preparedness. The piece correctly lays out the legal basis, the Antideficiency Act exceptions.
Right. Safety of human life, protection of property.
And the OMB Circular A11 requirement for those contingency plans, the lapse plan summaries.
Yeah, the framework's clear, but I wonder, are we looking closely enough at the hidden costs and the sheer friction involved in just having and implementing those plans, even if a shutdown is short?
Interesting. So the weakness isn't that the plans don't exist, but that the analysis treats them like a smooth, stable solution.
Kind of, yeah. It implies preparedness without really digging into the administrative nightmare and the cost of the preparation itself. It's a costly burden on top of the crisis.
Okay, so the suggestion is to strengthen the critique by focusing on that administrative chaos. The financial friction caused by the planning, the employee classifications.
Yes, expose the illusion of preparedness. Show the collateral costs.
How do we make that concrete, though? Federal data on prep costs usually pretty scattered, isn't it?
It is hard to pin down federally, but we can shift the argument. It's not just lost GDP, it's wasted administrative effort.
And we can use analogies.
Like state governments.
Exactly. Look at Minnesota in 2011. They estimated their preparation costs $6.2 million, just identifying critical services, sending layoff notices.
Wow, millions spent just getting ready for something that might not even happen or might be over quickly.
Right. Suggest quantifying that at the federal level, even if estimated. Focus on the non-recoverable costs of simply managing the potential shutdown. Issuing furlough notices isn't free.
Good point. What else adds to this administrative chaos?
Well, look at the accepted employees, the ones who have to work. The OPM guidance is brutal.
How so?
It states that a lapse in appropriations actually cancels any previously approved paid time off for those accepted employees. So if you had a vacation planned and paid for, and you're deemed accepted, tough luck, you're furloughed for that time instead?
Basically, yes. It forces them into furlough status for that planned leave. Think about the personal disruption, the financial hit, the morale impact.
Yeah, that shows how even the framework meant to keep essential services running creates its own form of distress. That definitely bolsters the critique.
Absolutely. And then there are the private partners, the contractors.
Ah, the stop work orders.
Exactly. They can request equitable adjustments later for their costs. Things like idle facilities, unabsorbed overhead.
And there were thousands of those orders, right? Like over 10,000 in the 2013 shutdown?
That's the number. So that proves the costs ripple out way beyond the government's direct payroll or operations. It creates future liabilities.
Okay, so the administrative burden isn't just internal paperwork. It's canceled leave for employees and real costs passed on from contractors. It paints a much messier picture than just agencies have plans.
Precisely. It's a cost center, not really a clean mitigation strategy.
Got it. Okay, third major point. This connects to the avoidance tactics, specifically continuing resolutions, CRs. The piece rightly points out Congress struggles to pass the actual appropriations bills.
Yeah, that's well established. But again, I think we can push the analysis further. Is avoiding a shutdown with CRs actually solving the problem, or is it its own kind of chronic damage?
You mean the reliance on CRs itself is a separate, significant economic drag?
That's the idea. The weakness here is maybe treating CRs just as a way to delay a shutdown, rather than analyzing them as a self-inflicted wound that hurts government effectiveness and raises costs constantly, even when we don't have a full shutdown.
Okay, so the suggestion is restructure this bit. Argue that frequent CRs make the whole budget process inefficient, turning it from a planning tool into, well, a source of constant fiscal inefficiency.
Yeah, it's not strategic planning anymore. It's just reactive, short-term patching.
What are the concrete examples of that damage? How does operating under CRs actually hurt?
Well, think about contracts. Agencies can't commit to long-term deals. They have to break up maintenance, support, everything into these shorter, more labor-consuming pieces.
Which probably costs more in the long run.
Almost certainly. And contracting officers are always rushing against the next CR deadline, with funding uncertainty. They can't focus effectively on getting the best price or the best quality.
That makes sense. It creates constant friction in procurement.
Huge friction. And then there's the execution bottleneck. This is critical.
What do you mean by bottleneck?
Okay, so say Congress finally passes a full-year appropriation, but it's like 6 months into the fiscal year already.
Which happens a lot.
Way too often. Then agencies have to wait for OMB to apportion the funds. By the time they get the money and the green light, there might only be 3 or 4 months left in the fiscal year to actually spend it.
Okay.
And crucially, under CRs, there's generally that prohibition on new starts.
Right. Agencies can't kick off new programs or initiatives.
So combine that tight execution window with the no new starts rule. It makes it incredibly difficult to hire people effectively, launch important new projects, or adapt to changing needs. You're basically paralyzed for half the year, and then end a mad dash for the other half.
That really paints a picture of operational paralysis. It's not just inconvenient. It fundamentally undermines the government's ability to function strategically.
Exactly. And this isn't a rare occurrence. We need to stress the frequency. The GAO reported, 47 CRs between fiscal 2010 and 2022?
47 in 12 years? Wow.
Yeah. It proves this isn't just an occasional fallback. It's become the default operating mode. It's a persistent structural flaw, a chronic condition causing its own major economic damage.
So the reliance on CRs isn't a solution. It's part of the problem, ensuring long-term inefficiency whether or not a big shutdown happens.
That's the argument to make. Frame CRs as this silent, systemic cost of the underlying gridlock.
Okay, this has been really productive. Let's quickly recap the main suggestions. First, synthesize those specific shutdown impacts, the human stories like the Coast Guard, the localized economic pain in D.C., the market jitters, into a stronger narrative about how they create political leverage to end the crisis.
Right. Second, Challenge that idea of smooth agency preparedness. Focus instead on the messy reality, the costly administrative burden of planning, the canceled leave for accepted workers, the ripple effects on contractors. Show the friction.
And third, analyze continuing resolutions not just as a delay tactic, but as a chronic problem in themselves. Show how they create long-term inefficiency through fragmented contracting and those execution bottlenecks, even when a full shutdown is avoided.
Exactly. Making these shifts should take the analysis from being a very strong factual report, which it is, to an even sharper, more focused policy critique. Really maximize the impact for the reader by explaining the why and the hidden costs more effectively.
Excellent. These refinements should significantly enhance the piece's overall insight.
We genuinely think so. And as always, we'd love to see the revised version when you're ready. Please feel free to send your updated work back our way for another look.
Welcome to the debate. We are diving straight into the fire today. Washington is staring down another potential financial cliff. That's September 30th, 2025 deadline for fiscal year 2026 funding. It's racing towards us, and, well, the threat of another government shutdown drama feels very, very real. It's fueled by, intense partisan fighting over pretty much everything. Short-term patches, long-term healthcare policy. But here's the big question, the really high-stakes one we have to tackle. Is this annual, costly, often chaotic struggle just a sign that our democracy is failing? Or is it actually the essential constitutional mechanism that keeps the executive branch in check? For our KaiZen audience, you demand clarity here, right? So we're asking, does the really high cost and the sheer human misery caused by these funding fights outweigh the constitutional necessity of Congress using its power of the purse? My argument today is that this messy, sometimes painful, annual struggle is an indispensable constitutional tool for oversight.
I have to take a fundamentally different view on this. Look, while the constitutional history is, sure, significant, I just cannot accept that the operational breakdown and the, frankly, overwhelming human costs, which always seem to crush the most vulnerable, our federal workers, our military families, are an acceptable price for political leverage. When the process itself causes this kind of catastrophic, avoidable harm, well, it stops being functional governance and just becomes unforgivable political theater.
Okay, let's ground this in some history and the Constitution itself. My core claim really is that the annual appropriations process, even when it leads to a brief funding gap, it's a critical constitutional lever. This isn't some new political game. This idea goes back centuries. Think about the British Parliament using the power of the purse to control the king. The founders intentionally built this kind of tension into our system. So moving sharply away from time-limited funding, that would be deliberately weakening this crucial push and pull between Congress and the president. The system is designed for some friction. And what about the economics? The evidence actually shows resilience, not total disaster. Historically, shutdowns are temporary. The average is just over a week. And the critical fact, it really bears repeating, is that these funding gaps have never triggered a full-blown recession. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, when they analyze these things, they consistently find the macroeconomic impact is, quote, relatively modest. And crucially, it's recoverable. Take the longest shutdown, 2018-2019. Okay, it caused maybe a $3 billion dip in GDP that quarter, but growth tends to bounce back by a similar amount soon after. It suggests the delay, not destruction. Plus, let's not forget essential mandatory services, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, even the post office, they keep running because they're funded differently.
Okay, but that argument, focusing purely on GDP rebound, it just completely misses where the pain actually lands. We're talking about microeconomic devastation for real families. I'm sorry, but the idea that some eventual economic recovery justifies this kind of human cruelty, I just don't buy it. Look at the 1.3 million active duty service members. We're potentially looking at the third time since September, where many face the threat of reporting for duty, which they have to do under threat of court-martial, without knowing if they'll get paid. We know from 2020 data, over a quarter of service members already report financial difficulties normally. This isn't some abstract economic theory. This is about rent, groceries, right now. And the evidence is frankly horrifying. A 2022 survey found over a quarter of enlisted active duty families reported food insecurity. That crisis hits service members of color much harder, disproportionately hard. Using the threat of a shutdown, it feels like using military families as political hostages. And the cost isn't abstract either. The OMB, Office of Management and Budget, estimated the 2013 shutdown cost $2 billion in lost labor costs. That's back pay for work not done, plus another $1 billion a week lost from halted IRS tax enforcement. This isn't some necessary check. It's a measurable, immediate operational failure that sacrifices the financial well-being of the very people serving the country. And I want to hear from you, our KaiZen listeners, on this. Have you or someone you know been directly impacted by shutdown threats? Pause right now, write 0 if you faced financial stress because of this, or 1 if you think the political outcome justified that risk. Share your story with the KaiZen community.
Right. I see the immediate strain you're focusing on, and the personal cost is absolutely undeniable, but we do have to look at the structural stabilizers that are in place. Retroactive pay is guaranteed for furloughed workers, and that's not just, a nice gesture. It's a major mitigating factor for the economy. Unlike a real recession or some systemic shock, the government's guarantee means the payroll issue eventually corrects itself. That helps prevent the kind of deep, long-term economic fear that makes consumers just stop spending altogether. And think about this. Congress itself is insulated. Members get their salaries no matter what. It's written into permanent law. That preserves the legislative function, the oversight function, even when there's a funding gap. The system prioritizes keeping that oversight going while applying, yes, temporary fiscal pressure. That pressure is kind of the point.
Okay, but retroactive pay is just a promise of getting paid later. It does absolutely nothing for the person who can't pay rent or buy groceries today. That promise doesn't stop the cascade of damage when the money just isn't there for weeks. And let me tell you why that economic damage isn't fully mitigated. This is where the data gets frankly terrifying for the idea of a simple recovery. We need to look really closely at personal consumption expenditures, PCE. That's the key metric the government uses for consumer spending. When PCE drops and stays down, it signals a permanent change in behavior. Data from that 2018-2019 shutdown, it showed big losses in PCE around government and military bases, about $102.8 million loss. And critically, those specific losses showed absolutely no sign of bouncing back afterwards. So that's not just delayed spending, it's permanent consumer loss. People tightened their belts and they never bought that thing, never ate that meal out. If the macro impact is so easily fixed, why didn't that money ever find its way back into those local economies?
That's a powerful point about PCE, and it certainly highlights the immediate, localized damage. I grant that. Those local PCE losses are regrettable. They're real. I would argue, however, that those localized hits, painful as they are, they don't constitute a national systemic failure that justifies throwing out this crucial constitutional lever. The broader macroeconomic analysis still holds, I believe, that the overall national economy does absorb and correct the shock. If we get rid of the annual appropriations mechanism entirely because of localized PCE impacts, what's the price we pay down the road in lost accountability over, multi-trillion-dollar federal agencies?
But the damage ripples out much further than just local stores or government payroll. This constant uncertainty is an instant shock to the private sector, too. The ripple effect is huge. Remember 2013? Roughly 700 small businesses, the engine of our economy, right? They were applying for about $140 million in loans. They couldn't get approved because the federal agencies were shut. Those businesses stalled, maybe some died, or they had to find much more expensive financing. And government contractors, the people who actually build the roads and run the programs, over 10,000 stop work orders were issued. Think about that. These companies had to eat costs, idle facilities, overhead they couldn't bill for, and then they had to fight for equitable adjustments later. And crucially, experts consistently say this systemic uncertainty, this reliance on short-term fixes like continuing resolutions or CRs,
It actively hurts federal agencies when they try to recruit top talent. Why would the best engineer or scientist choose government service if they know their paycheck might just vanish every few months? It leads to a kind of national brain drain caused entirely by this structural dysfunction.
That's a compelling point about the recruitment challenge, absolutely. But let's circle back to the legal framework here, the necessary safeguards. The foundation is the Antideficiency Act. Yes, it forces a shutdown if there's no appropriation, but it also has clear exceptions for activities needed to protect life and property. That's why essential functions, air traffic control, border security, emergency law enforcement, they continue. The framework does try to prioritize safety. And regarding the broader fiscal anxiety, we really need to distinguish between a shutdown and a true debt crisis. Fitch Ratings warned about a potential U.S. credit downgrade, yes, but that risk was tied to an extended failure to manage the debt ceiling or pass a budget over the long term. The accountability, I think, is rightly placed on lawmakers to reach an agreement. The chaos, arguably, forces them to actually do their jobs.
See, that defense of the essential function category, that's where I really struggle with the logic. I'm just not convinced. That categorization feels political, often arbitrary, and it still results in critical failures. I mean, how can we call something essential if its funding depends entirely on which specific appropriations bill happens to fail? Take the Coast Guard in 2018-2019. They were affected because their budget is under Homeland Security, while the Navy, Army, Air Force under DoD were funded initially. But the Coast Guard was still doing missions in the Persian Gulf and the Caribbean, right alongside the Navy, just without pay. How is patrolling U.S. coastlines or stopping drug smugglers any less essential than what the other military branches do? And beyond that, think about public health. When non-emergency FDA food safety inspections just stop completely, as they did in 2019, that's a direct risk to every American, not some abstract economic cost.
That's an interesting point about the inconsistency based on which agency bill fails, though I'd frame it differently. Look, the problem isn't the shutdown mechanism itself, I don't think. It's the utter failure of our political process to actually use the mechanism correctly. The process requires passing 12 separate annual appropriation bills on time. Congress consistently fails at this. That forces us into these short-term continuing resolutions, CRs. The numbers are stark, 47 CRs between 2010 and 2022 alone. So the mechanism, the process is arguably sound. It's the political will to actually manage the budget that's broken. The temporary disruption, ugly as it is, becomes the necessary pressure point to try and break the gridlock that's already there.
Okay, but if the mechanism is sound but the politics are broken, shouldn't we, the KaiZen community, be looking for simpler ways to analyze this mess and maybe find a structural fix? We know Congress can change the system. They already amended the Antideficiency Act to guarantee back pay. They treated one symptom, so why not take the next logical step? Why not enact longer-term, maybe even mandatory appropriations for services that are clearly non-negotiable? Things like military pay, the Coast Guard, those vital food safety checks? Or as was discussed back in 2013, why not pass funding bills piecemeal, fund the critical stuff first, ensure stability, then fight over the more ideological budget items?
Well, I'm not convinced by that because those seemingly simple fixes, they essentially risk neutering the legislative branch. Yes, Congress could make longer-term appropriations, but many policy experts warn against moving too sharply away from time-limited funding, precisely because it sacrifices that crucial leverage in the checks and balances system. If you permanently fund all the essentials, military pay, basic agency operations, Congress loses that immediate pressure point it needs to force the executive branch to negotiate on really high-stakes policies. Think border security, foreign aid, major healthcare changes. The pain of the shutdown, the market jitters, the public anger, that's what generates the political urgency to resolve these deep underlying disagreements. If you remove that pressure, you make it much easier for the executive branch to just operate indefinitely without robust congressional oversight. It's an ugly tool, yes, but it might be the strongest tool Congress actually has.
You argue the leverage is necessary for oversight, but I have to counter. If using that leverage means deliberately inflicting financial pain and compromising public health, at what point does the cost of that ugly tool just become too high? The way we're doing it now feels like structural sabotage, not functional oversight.
And that right there is the fundamental tension. It's baked into our governing documents. The accountability the Constitution demands versus the operational stability a modern country needs.
Which is a perfect place for you, our fantastic KaiZen audience, to jump in. We've really dug into the core tension of this looming 2025 shutdown threat.
Right. On one side, we heard the defense that this appropriations standoff, messy as it is a necessary constitutional exercise. Checks and balances, with economic costs that, historically at least, seem to be recoverable. The core idea being that legislative control over the executive is paramount.
And on the other side, the really powerful argument that the immediate severe human and operational costs, unpaid military families struggling with food, halted FDA inspections, permanent hits to local economies, that price is simply too high for political leverage.
Understanding both of these strong, evidence-based arguments, drawing on history, data like PCE, that's the key to really mastering this complex story. Don't let the drama coming out of Washington leave you confused. We want you to be able to analyze this risk versus reward for yourself.
Exactly. You, the KaiZen audience, you're now equipped to see this from multiple angles. So, we need your final, quick take. Should Congress prioritize operational certainty over political leverage? Or is that leverage absolutely vital for real oversight? We need you to interact right now. If you believe the immediate human and operational costs have to be avoided, maybe through structural change, type N in the comments, N for no more shutdowns. If you think this volatile process, this leverage is essential for checks and balances, type Y for yes to the process.
And if this discussion helps bring some clarity to this mind-boggling situation, please hit that like button and share it right now. And seriously, if you have a personal story about how a past shutdown or even just a CRA affected you or your business, pause the recording and share that story with the KaiZen community right now. We want to hear it. Until next time, keep digging deeper, keep seeking understanding.